Welcome to the Psychology Undergrad.
For this deep dive, we have landed on a really foundational subject. I mean, it sits right at the intersection of sociology, social psychology, even anthropology.
And it challenges what is maybe the single most fundamental, taken for granted idea in our society.
Yeah, we are tackling the massive, complicated question, what is family?
And the immediate answer, the one that really sets the tone for this whole exploration, is that we must not define the family.
It sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But our source material, which pulls really heavily from the work of John Bernardo, argues that the search for one single definition isn't just, difficult.
It's actually theoretically flawed. It's filled with ideological baggage. And this is the key part. It actually causes real, significant social harm.
Exactly. Bernard points out this critical conceptual problem that people just miss. When researchers or, just regular people approach this topic, they tend to skip a really crucial step.
What's that?
They take the existence of the family, capital T, capital F, as an absolute given.
Right. As if it's this concrete thing that just exists out in the world.
Yes. And all this grand theorizing in sociology and psychology and social work, it all depends on that assumption being true.
And that's the subtlety we really need to get our heads around today. It's not about finding a better, more inclusive definition. The deep dive mission here is to show you why the very act of trying to define a singular, the family, is the trap itself.
And the aha moment for you, the listener, is realizing that the concept of the family isn't just descriptive.
No, it's highly prescriptive.
Yeah.
It's a template. It's a set of instructions, really, a moral standard.
Exactly. I mean, when you have a concept that shapes government policy, that defines morality, that dictates what men and women are supposed to do, and that sets our own, deeply personal expectations for what counts as happiness or failure.
And that concept doesn't actually match reality.
It inevitably leads to what Bernard just bluntly called oppression and misery. You're setting this impossible ideological standard that most people are just destined to fail to meet.
Okay, so let's unpack how this template, this ideal, got so powerful. Because that's what created this theoretical crisis for everyone who was trying to study what family life is actually like. We have to start by, I think, defining the traditional model, the ideal image.
Even if that image is, as we'll see, a complete statistical myth.
Exactly.
And that image is, well, it's just so clear, isn't it? It's been reinforced for so long in our culture, in media, in politics. Saul gave a classic definition back in 1983.
And what was that?
It's the married heterosexual couple with children, and it's fundamentally built around a sexual division of labor.
And that division is pretty rigid.
Oh, totally. The husband is the breadwinner. He's the provider. He operates out in the public sphere. And the wife is the dependent, the homemaker. Her primary role is all the unpaid labor running the home, being the main caregiver for the kids, the emotional support system for the husband.
It's not just a description of a household then. It's a blueprint for how you're supposed to live a moral life.
And what's fascinating is how quickly that blueprint gets politicized. The second you define that ideal structure, you immediately create political and moral stakes.
Right.
In the 1980s, especially in the UK, you had authors like Anderson and Dawson arguing so fiercely that the family exists that it was in this deep crisis because of things like divorce or women working.
And so it had to be supported and defended at all costs.
Yes, restored to its traditional glory. And that brings the moral judgment into really sharp focus.
Because if you say there's this one single perfect the family, then any deviation from that,
Like being a single parent or just living with someone or having a household where the guy stays home.
it's automatically condemned, often explicitly, right? They call it deviant or even pathological.
Absolutely. The concept of the family becomes a kind of weapon, really. It's used to police society and punish anyone who doesn't conform.
And that creates a massive theoretical headache for researchers. I mean, if you're a sociologist just trying to study reality, how do you hold on to a concept that's politically powerful but empirically just false?
You can't, really. And Sheil cataloged the 4 main academic strategies researchers try to use to sort of reconcile this powerful but untrue ideal with the messy reality of life. It really shows you the gravitational pull of that core concept.
Okay, so what's the first one?
The first, and you could argue it's the most conservative academic response, is concept specification. This is the approach you see from scholars like Navers.
So they look at the evidence, they see the high divorce rates, people living together, all these different family structures.
Yes, they acknowledge all that, but they still assert that the family is culturally universal, and because of that, it has to remain the absolute focus of study.
So they're basically saying, okay, we see the messy reality, but we're not letting go of our theoretical anchor.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's like they recognize that most real-world shapes are irregular polygons, but they insist that all geometry research has to be centered on the perfect geometric square.
They're trying to find that one essential, universal core function of the family-like reproduction or socializing kids, and make that the defining thing, even if the structure itself looks totally different everywhere.
Exactly.
But wait, if the term is so loaded with all these moral and political assumptions, why not just ditch it? That seems like the cleanest solution.
And that leads you right to the second strategy, which is concept abandonment. This was championed by scholars like Scanzoni.
And his strategy was just that simple.
Pretty much. He argued that the term the family is too ideologically compromised, it's too limiting, it's just got too much historical baggage. So let's just drop it. Let's focus instead on descriptive neutral terms, like close relationships or primary
I
relationships.
can see the appeal of that. It's like intellectual disarmament. You get rid of the loaded term and just describe the human connections that are actually happening.
It sounds clean, but what's the critique?
Well, wouldn't just abandoning the term mean you're conceding the political battlefield to the traditionalists? They're still going to use the family to enforce their moral standards.
Precisely. That's the critique that Bernards and others had. Just ignoring the term doesn't make its power in public discourse go away. It's still being used to write laws and, create misery.
Which brought them to the third strategy.
The third strategy, which is where Bernards firmly plants his flag, concept displacement.
This is the post-positivist view. And for our listeners, post-positivism basically rejects the idea that we can find a single objective, value-free truth about social stuff.
So these theorists, like Bernards or Gubrium and Holstein, they don't try to escape the concept by ignoring it. They confront it by changing what they're studying entirely.
How so?
They reject the existence of the family in concrete reality. They argue that when scholars try to define the family, they're doing something called reification.
Reification. That's treating an abstract idea as if it were a real, tangible thing.
Exactly. It's confusing the map for the territory.
Ah, so it's like taking the blueprint, our perfect square, and insisting it must be the actual building material of every single house.
And if that's the mistake, then the job of the sociologist has to shift fundamentally.
So their job isn't to define the family anymore.
No, their job is to study the construction, use, location, and power of the term the family in everyday language. The real study is about how normal people generate and negotiate these meanings, how they use the word family to police or celebrate their own relationships, not how sociologists can fit those messy relationships into a textbook definition.
So instead of asking, what does a family do, we should be asking, what does the idea of family do to the people who use it?
That is a massive conceptual shift. It turns the field from descriptive science into critical discourse analysis.
Okay, so what's the last strategy Chil identified?
The final one is concept expansion. This is where you have scholars like the Rappaports or Trost who accept all the diversity but still try to generalize a model of that diversity within a broad understanding of the family.
This sounds like a kind of compromise. You keep the term, but you stretch it to fit reality.
It seems like a noble effort, but Trost himself basically pointed out how impossible it is. He famously said there is no possibility of defining the family, and he even admitted, evidently, no one knows what a family is.
Yet he still felt like he had to develop a model based on parent-child and spousal units.
That tension just shows you the immense gravitational force this idea has on us. Even when the most rigorous thinkers realize the concept is theoretically bankrupt, there's this huge societal pressure, maybe academic inertia, to hold on to some kind of definitional core. We just assume the word has to mean something concrete.
Well, if the ideal model is on such shaky theoretical ground, how does it hold up against the cold, hard numbers? Let's get into the statistical demolition of this perfect image. Because if the nuclear family is this universal template, you'd expect the data to show it's at least common.
And this is where the myth just completely and utterly collapses. The numbers are genuinely shocking, especially when you think about how often this ideal is still talked about in politics and moral debates.
And very few scholars, until pretty recently, even bothered to ask if this conventional family has ever been a majority thing.
No, the power of the ideological image just made the counting seem unnecessary. Everyone just assumed it was the norm.
So let's start almost a century ago, just to show this isn't some modern thing. Bowley and Hogg back in 1925 in the UK.
Right. And they were studying the conventional family. They defined it very strictly. A wage-earning man, his wife, and exactly 3 dependent children. this five-person structure, the absolute ideal of the industrial age.
It accounted for what, only 5% of all the families they looked at?
Only 5%. Just think about what that means. At a time we romanticize as the golden age of the nuclear family, pre-World War II, pre-sexual revolution, only 1 in 20 families actually matched that precise ideal.
The vast majority had different numbers of kids or no kids, or the dad wasn't the sole breadwinner, or the mom was working.
Right. Now, fast forward a few decades, past the post-war boom. In 1978, a study by Ramey in the United States found that only 13% of families fit that strict nuclear model.
Father as sole breadwinner, mother at home, kids being raised.
And just a decade after that, the number had halved. Ricketts and Achtenberg in 1989 claimed only 7% of the entire U.S. population was living in that specific situation.
And if you apply really strict sociological criteria, the numbers get even smaller, right?
Yes.
Especially in the UK.
Oh, much smaller. Analysis of the 1981 UK census suggested that less than 2% of families strictly matched the nuclear family model.
Why so low?
Because a really strict definition requires more than just who lives there. You have to consider things like the age of the children, the specific stage of child rearing they're in, and the absence of things like chronic illness or disability, which completely change the household dynamic.
And this is where Bernardo really hammers the point home using the 1991 UK census.
Yeah, he found that only 14.6% of households even contained the basic structural parts. 1 adult male, 1 adult female, 1 to 3 dependent kids, and only 1 adult employed.
But here's the kicker, right? That 14.6% still includes people who are just cohabiting and not married?
Right, or unrelated adults and children, or adults with chronic illnesses. All things that technically violate the strict ideological ideal of the family, which demands marriage and health to fulfill the roles.
So once you apply that strict moralistic definition,
the true proportion is likely, as he put it, a small fraction of 1%.
a small fraction of 1%, that's statistically irrelevant. It's like building our entire legal and moral framework around the assumption that a specific rare breed of pigeon in Antarctica is the norm for all birds. It's the ultimate confirmation bias.
And this total failure of the numbers leads right into the most common rebuttal, what Bernardo calls the stage fallacy.
The stage fallacy. This is where people say, okay, it's not the majority right now, but it's a stage that all functional families have to pass through.
It's the inevitable life cycle argument.
And the counter-argument is so powerful because it just exposes how superficial that kind of thinking is.
It really is. I mean, yes, many people do pass through a phase where there's 2 adults and 1 or 2 kids in a house, but that does not mean they share a common experience. The structure tells you nothing about the emotional reality.
Exactly. Passing through that stage could involve years of domestic abuse. It could end in a horrible divorce. It could be marked by financial ruin.
Or it could be a wonderfully supportive, successful marriage. The objective circumstance, 2 adults, 2 kids, is the same, but the subjective experience is wildly diverse. It's a fundamental flaw to assume people have the same experience just because they're in the same superficial situation.
It's like our geometric analogy again. The textbook family is the perfect square. We assume it's common, rigid, predictable. But the messy reality of diverse families is always more like an abstract, irregular polygon.
It might have 4 sides, but the angles are always unique, the internal pressures are different, and the experience of being inside that shape is highly variable. We have to focus on the unique geometry, not the abstract square.
Which leads us perfectly into the vast landscape of variation and diversity. Because if the numbers show the ideal model is basically a myth, then the only conclusion is that the sheer extent of variation is enough on its own to invalidate the whole idea of the nuclear family as anything more than a powerful cultural image.
Difference is the rule, not the exception.
To really detail this, we can look at the 5 key types of diversity that Weeks summarized, drawing on the work of the Rappaports. These are concrete tools that just dismantle that monolithic ideal.
The first one is organizational diversity. This is all about the internal logistics of the household, the daily patterns.
Like who does the cooking, who earns the money, who pays the bills.
Exactly. And this is so influenced by the balance of unpaid domestic work versus paid work outside the home. A dual-earner family where both parents commute and share childcare is just organized in a radically different way from a household where one partner is financially dependent and manages the home full-time.
Okay, what's the second type?
Second, and this is so important for understanding moral differences, is cultural diversity. These are all the variations in behavior, beliefs, and values that are driven by culture, ethnicity, politics, and especially religious affiliations.
And the source material really stresses that huge variations exist even within groups that look the same on the outside.
Yeah, let's use a specific example. Imagine a dual-working, nominally Christian couple living in a secular city. Now, contrast their life with a male breadwinner, Orthodox Jewish couple living in a close-knit religious community, even if both couples are at a similar middle-class economic level.
Their daily lives would be completely different.
Completely. The Orthodox family will have all these deeply ritualized behaviors around food, gender separation, community life, how the kids are educated, things that are totally absent in the secular household. Their idea of family responsibility is just fundamentally different. Culture and religion just override the economic class.
Then the third is social class diversity. This is probably the most obvious one, driven by material and social resources.
Right. It dictates the whole spectrum of choices and resources you have. It ranges from the most basic stuff, like having enough food and decent housing, to really specific attitudes about raising kids.
For instance, a wealthy family can choose to use paid nannies or send their children to boarding schools, which totally changes the daily interaction and dependency in the home.
Whereas a poor working-class family might have to rely on grandparents or cousins for childcare and live in crowded conditions, which alters their interaction patterns in a completely different way. Class isn't just about money, it's about your access to different solutions.
Fourth, we have cohort diversity. This just acknowledges that the historical period you're born into profoundly shapes your family experience.
Think about it. People born during a war, or a major economic depression, or during a time of civil unrest like the Troubles in Northern Ireland, they're going to carry different expectations and behaviors into their adult lives compared to generations that grew up in peace and prosperity.
And even less dramatic shifts, like the big increases in divorce and cohabitation across Europe and the US, mean that later cohorts just negotiate commitment and relationships very differently than their parents or grandparents did.
And finally, number 5 is family life course diversity. This recognizes that life changes dramatically with big events. Having kids, kids leaving home, retirement, the death of a partner.
But the key insight here is that because of the other four types of diversity, it's almost impossible for all families to pass through essentially similar life phases.
Exactly. Take two couples who are the exact same life stage, say they just had their first baby. Their experiences are still completely unique because their pathways to that point were unique.
So a poor African Caribbean couple having their first child won't have the same experiences or resources as a wealthy, public school educated couple.
Yeah.
The stage parenthood is shared, but the path to it and the ability to handle its demands are totally different.
Yeah. Recognizing that complexity is vital.
And building on all this diversity is a crucial sociological idea: invisibility. A sociologist named Mayer argued that we actually know surprisingly little about other people's married lives.
Why? Because the most important parts of a marriage, the emotional economy, the conflicts, the subtle power dynamics, are all unseen. They're invisible to outsiders.
Mayer said this invisibility comes directly from the assumptive world that we all operate in.
Right. We don't need to see the specific details of our neighbor's marriage because we just assume the ideal. We project the image of the family onto them. We assume they're normal and functional and happy until something obvious proves otherwise.
Like a police car showing up or a big public scandal.
And that very assumption is what allows deviance to flourish behind closed doors. Another sociologist, Ball, made an explicit link between deviance and privacy.
He argued that the more private an area of behavior is, and family life is intensely private, the clearer and more rigid the public social norms are.
But at the same time, the more extensive the private deviance will be.
Because the ideology of the family says what should be happening: love, support, security. That intense privacy shields everything that contradicts it.
Domestic violence, child abuse, financial control, just chronic unhappiness. It ensures those problems are seen as deviant and abnormal exceptions, not as systemic realities of family life. The image protects the abuse.
Okay, so if the concept of the family is statistically irrelevant, impossibly diverse, and even used to mask systemic problems, why is the idea of it so incredibly powerful? This is where we have to get into the deep water of ideology.
Yeah, this is where we shift from describing what families are to analyzing the immense social power of the idea of the family. We have to start with Mannheim and his distinction between two levels of ideology.
Okay, so you have particular ideology. This is the stuff we see in politics every day, right? The specific views of an opponent, like a political party's platform, that you can criticize and argue against.
It's open for debate. But you have total ideology, which is way more pervasive. These are the fundamental, often unstated, core ideas of an entire era or a whole social group. And family ideology operates at this deep total level.
It's the background noise. It's the water we swim in. You don't think about the air until you can't breathe.
You don't think about family ideology until you try to live outside its rules. And Morgan explained how this total ideology works so efficiently. Society has tons of ways it could handle things like having kids or forming bonds.
But the ideology selects just one specific method, the nuclear family structure, and proclaims it as the only true method, labeling it as natural and inevitable.
And by calling it natural, it immediately justifies the existing power structures, gender roles, age hierarchies, and it makes any alternative seem, by definition, unnatural or even biologically wrong. It's the ultimate justification.
And Barrett shows us this ideology doesn't just exist in books. It's reproduced and reinforced through our most mundane, everyday actions. Well, the idea that women are natural caregivers leads directly to men hesitating or not knowing how to do certain domestic tasks, or feeling weird about comforting a lost child in public, while women are expected to naturally take on that role.
So the ideology creates the action, which then reinforces the ideology. It's a closed loop.
And the consequences of this are devastating. Bernardo points out that modernist family theory, the kind that tried to define the family, meant that researchers paid attention almost exclusively to white, middle-class, two-parent families.
And by only focusing on the ideal, that whole structure actively denied the possibility that widespread, systemic abuse or unhappiness could even exist within the family. If the family is good, any problems have to be weird exceptions.
And this ideology also leads to what Ribbons called extreme individualism, because the family is defined by these fixed, rigid roles, father, mother, daughter, son. It forces each person into their own separate box. The whole structure depends on creating and sustaining inequality between these positions.
Bernardo pulls no punches here. He argues this isn't just a theoretical mistake. It actively perpetuates wholesale oppression of men, women, and children.
Because it encourages people to imitate these uncomfortable, unworkable images of behavior and gender roles that rarely fit who they actually are.
And that, he says, leads to suffering and misery on a truly grand scale. Sociology, by upholding this idol, has actually made societal harm worse.
This whole mechanism of manufacturing agreement is explained so well through the lens of the social construction of reality, from Berger and Kellner's work on marriage.
Right. They argue that marriage and family life have this privileged status for validating who we are as adults in society. The daily intimate process of family interaction generates this shared sense of reality.
How does that work?
Well, through continuous conversation, routines, daily interactions, reality gets crystallized, narrowed, and stabilized. All the ambivalence you might have before getting married. Am I ready? Should we move? Is this the right job? It gets converted into certainty. Possibilities become facts.
And the crucial part is that this transformation often happens without the people involved even realizing it.
That's the shared bubble reality. Think about a couple that has their own private jokes and unique habits. Their way of doing things becomes the right way. Their private understanding of the world becomes their shared objective reality, and it protects their relationship from the chaos outside.
And that manufactured certainty closes off other ways of living as seeming unnatural or weird.
Yes, that created certainty is the core of the family's ideological power. And it doesn't just stay in the house. It has a profound connection to the wider social structure.
So family life is like the primary training ground for how we conduct all our personal relationships.
Exactly. It establishes the first patterns of authority, deference, and respect, how we learn to relate to power and inequality. And we later apply those patterns, often unconsciously, to the rest of society, at school, at work, when dealing with bureaucracies.
So if you learn at home that gender determines who has authority, you carry that learned structure into the office or the voting booth.
To summarize this huge ideological mechanism, Bernard's laid out 4 key functions of family ideology. Not the family itself, but the ideology.
Okay, what's the first?
First, the ideology sustains an individualistic mode of thought. It makes us think our problems are unique to our family and should be solved internally instead of being linked to bigger social structures.
Second, it sustains an essentially naturalistic analysis of human behavior. This is the idea that the division of labor between men and women isn't social, it's a biological imperative, it's just how nature intended.
Third, it facilitates and sustains major forms of differentiation in society, mainly age and gender. By giving fixed, unequal roles to fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, it maintains the social hierarchy.
And fourth, his most provocative point. It constitutes an idealistic mystification of human social life.
Meaning it literally creates and worships an idol of the family, a perfect image that simultaneously hides and obscures the messy, often painful reality of how people actually live. And that idol has to be protected, even if the cost is human suffering.
Wow. Okay, so if we accept that critique, that the ideal is an idol and a political tool, then we desperately need a new theoretical framework. We have to move beyond the ideal.
A crucial step here is to incorporate the concept of postmodern family life. Stacy used this term to signal the reality we're in now, the contested, ambivalent, and undecided character of contemporary gender and kinship arrangements.
We're in a state of flux, and our theories have to reflect that.
Exactly. This is the complete opposite of traditional modernist sociology, which assumed there were stable, objective facts and a natural order. Postmodernism starts from the reality of pluralism, disorder, and fragmentation.
So instead of looking at family life out there as a natural thing, we look at it in here, in our meds, in our language, in the constant fragile process of negotiation.
Duvall's study of cooking and meals is a fantastic illustration of this. A modernist theorist would just take the mother's role in cooking for granted. It's a functional necessity, someone has to cook. Traditionally, it's the mom. End of story.
But the postmodernist perspective shows that the interaction around the meal is actually a powerful ideological mechanism.
Right. The whole process of preparing, serving, and cleaning up actively reinforces sex roles and age-related behaviors. The simple routine of eating becomes this ritual that constantly recreates the ideological structure of the home. The mother isn't just cooking, she's performing a gender script.
Okay, so seeing this complexity, some early scholars tried to get around the problem by using the household concept instead of family. That seems pragmatic.
It is. Bender formalized the distinction. A household is a residence group that carries out domestic functions. It's about who lives together and shares tasks. Family, on the other hand, is a kinship group based on blood or marriage, and they might not even live together.
And this was useful for practical research, right? Especially for feminist scholars.
Incredibly useful. People like Brannon and Wilson used the household concept to track how resources were distributed inside a home. Who gets more food, who controls the money, things you can actually count within the four walls of a residence.
But there's a big limitation.
A huge one. Simply swapping family for household
Hmm.
just re-imports another popular, vague term. And more importantly, as Finch pointed out, so much of what defines family life, the sentiment, the moral obligations, the financial support, goes way beyond the walls of the current household.
Really caring for elderly parents who live somewhere else or supporting adult children.
Exactly. The household concept just fails to capture that enduring emotional and moral landscape of kinship.
So we need a model that can capture all that variation without imposing an ideal. Which brings us to the most important alternative model, the one Bernard has developed: family pathways.
The family pathways model rejects that static picture of the family as a fixed thing and instead focuses on the dynamic, fluid, personalized coming together of individual life courses. It flips the whole emphasis from the structure to the individual.
How is it defined?
It's elegantly simple. Individual life courses meet, sometimes they become interdependent, sometimes they combine, and maybe later they part. The person is continually negotiating a unique pathway through social structures, being a baby, a child, a spouse, a parent, a grandparent. These roles are just temporary intersections, not fixed identities.
What's revolutionary about that is it inherently allows for a much richer appreciation of variation. It focuses on the uniqueness of pathways, not on how closely a family fits an ideal type. It assumes complexity is the starting point.
Which means that if you have two people who go through the same experience, like parenthood, the model recognizes they got there from totally different routes, different class backgrounds, different personal histories, and so they're going to respond to it differently. That complexity is the very thing we should be studying, not filtering out.
Now we get to the heavy real-world implications:
Right.
policy, responsibility, and the future of family studies. If we accept that this ideological concept of the family causes massive harm, then social scientists have a profound ethical responsibility.
Yeah, Shipman was clear about this. There's no such thing as value-free research. The simple act of choosing a research topic or a framework embeds your values. And the study as a family has, historically, often unintentionally, upheld conservative, racist, classist, and heterosexist values.
It prioritizes a certain kind of life over all others.
And Bernards makes this really provocative point about social responsibility. He argues that what sociologists deal in ideas definitions are the very things people use to make choices about how to live. And he contends that by denying the reality of diversity and unhappiness and promoting the idol of the family, sociologists have wreaked havoc and harm in people's lives. We can't pretend our theories are neutral.
And he also addresses a big practical danger when we start to correct these mistakes.
Public case.
That revealing widespread family unuse or unhappiness, while it might be liberating for many, also risks intense denial from the audience, because that audience is often made up of both survivors and abusers.
It's in the interest of those who benefit from the status quo to deny or downplay research that suggests the problems are systemic. This is why issues like child abuse or domestic violence are still so often treated as deviant exceptions, because it keeps the idol of the family safe and untarnished.
This resistance shows why we need a new political concept to replace the old, loaded one, which brings us to family citizenship.
This was adopted as a sophisticated postmodern replacement. It's defined as the rights and duties held by individuals only because of their status in families.
The philosophical shift there is huge. Only individuals can hold rights, not an abstract thing like the family. But it recognizes that your individual rights are relational. They're lived out within the complex context of family obligations.
This is so important for vulnerable groups like children and the elderly. It enhances their individual citizenship by saying, for instance, that a child's rights aren't just abstract things the state gives them, they're relational. Society has a duty to facilitate a decent childhood, which is a duty placed primarily on the parents, but supported by the state.
It also gives us a much better framework for understanding the distribution of goods and bads. We know families distribute good things like food, money, love, and care.
But they also distribute bads: anger, despair, abuse, violence. This helps clarify that things like poverty or abuse aren't genetically inherited. They're distributed through the family's structural and emotional system. When a parent loses a job, that stress is distributed through the family, maybe leading to violence, which is then distributed to the children.
So it shifts the focus from individual failure to structural conditions.
And crucially, family citizenship shifts our focus away from the idea that one party, like parents, has absolute responsibility towards others. Instead, it focuses on reciprocity and relationships between all parties. Everyone, even a child, has rights and duties appropriate to their capacity. It's about mutual exchange, not top-down authority.
In terms of actual tangible policy, we can look at the concept of family associations.
Right. Donati described these as formalized social networks that address the needs of families as families. They're distinct from organizations that only focus on kids or marriage or the elderly. They see the family as a composite unit of individuals with interconnected needs.
And their goal is to provide systemic support for the reality of diverse families, not to impose a model on them.
We see this working in Europe. In Belgium, the Union of Large and Young Families has millions of members. They offer loans for baby equipment, run self-help groups for all family types, including single-parent and blended families, and they do political advocacy. They support families based on their actual needs.
And that's the trend for future policy. Organizations like the European Family Policy Observatory actively monitor trends in family life and then tailor policy to fit that reality, rather than trying to force reality to fit an ideological ideal.
Okay, let's try to synthesize everything. This has been a massive deep dive. We've had to reject the family as a static ideal, embrace the reality of diverse families and their fluid pathways, and recognize the massive oppressive power of the ideology we've all internalized.
To wrap it all up, we can go back to Bernardo's and his call to action for a new approach to family studies, which he summarized in 3 powerful theorems.
First, the theorem of sociological principle. We have to reject the concept of the family as theoretically adequate, period. And we have to recognize how hard it is to study family life because the term itself is contaminated.
Second, the theorem of sociological practice. We have to commit to studying the unity of everyday actual human experience, the whole complex person navigating their relationships. And we have to accept how incredibly difficult that is to do in practice. We have to embrace the complexity, not simplify it.
And finally, the theorem of social responsibility. We must recognize and be explicit about the potential and real harm of inadequate, ideologically driven sociology. We have to assert the importance of a new family studies to both protect society and benefit it by providing accurate, helpful knowledge about relationships.
That's the ultimate lesson for you, the listener. The whole point of understanding these theories is to move beyond the prescriptive image and study the reality. These new approaches, like family pathways and family citizenship, are meant to give us valuable knowledge that lets us actually minimize the pain and maximize the joy in real family living.
So here's our final provocative thought for you to think about. If the family is the idol we all venerate, as Bernard suggests, what hidden uncomfortable truths about our own family pathways, our own unique irregular polygons, are we actively ignoring or denying just to maintain the appearance of being normal?
And maybe more critically, what oppressive practices, whether it's gender roles, financial control, or emotional suppression, are reinforced every single time we use these loaded family terms without critical reflection. The language we use to describe our lives shapes the choices we make.
Start critically analyzing that language today.
Thanks for joining us for the Psychology Undergrad.